There are moments in life when everything seems to move backward at once. The promotion disappears without explanation. The relationship that seemed certain suddenly collapses. Doors that once opened effortlessly begin closing one after another. For many people, those moments raise a painful question. Why does it feel as though my life changed overnight? Some call it coincidence. Others call it bad luck. Still others believe someone is working against them. Whether that feeling comes from fear, grief, or unanswered questions, it can become powerful enough to shape every decision a person makes. This is a fictional story about one woman who became convinced she had discovered the answer. Her name was Nia. She grew up in a small village where old stories traveled farther than facts. Every failed harvest, every unexplained illness, every unexpected tragedy eventually became another tale whispered around evening fires. Children were warned not to wander after dark. Families locked their doors before sunset. Certain places in the forest were simply never discussed. As a child, Nia listened carefully. As a teenager, she believed every word. As an adult, she wanted to uncover the truth behind those stories. What she discovered was far different than she expected. Years later, sitting alone in a quiet room with a recorder placed on the table between us, she finally agreed to tell her story. She did not claim to possess supernatural powers. She did not ask anyone to believe every detail. She simply said, I spent years believing darkness had all the answers. I was wrong. She paused for several seconds before continuing. The greatest deception wasn't convincing people that evil existed. It was convincing them that fear should control every decision they made. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window. Inside, the silence felt heavier than the storm. I spent nearly 20 years chasing hidden knowledge, she continued. Every teacher promised another secret. Every ritual promised another level of power. Every answer created 10 more questions. She looked directly toward the recorder. And do you know what frightened me the most? It wasn't what I learned. It was what I lost while searching. Friends disappeared from her life. Family members stopped recognizing the person she had become. Every relationship became another sacrifice for knowledge she believed would finally explain why some people seemed blessed while others struggled endlessly. Then one night everything changed. Not because of a mysterious ritual, not because of a supernatural vision, but because she met an elderly pastor in a roadside cafe who asked a question no one had ever asked before. What if the greatest prison isn't a curse? What if it's the belief that your future has already been stolen? Naya laughed at him. She thought the old man understood nothing. Yet his question followed her home. It echoed through every book she had collected, every notebook she had filled, every explanation she had accepted without question. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. For the first time in years, certainty began to crack. And once certainty cracked, something unexpected entered her life. Hope. Looking back now, she says that was the true beginning of her journey, not toward hidden power, but toward freedom from fear itself. The story that follows is not about discovering secret forces controlling every event. It is about discovering how easily fear can become its own kind of prison and how truth, courage, and faith can begin to unlock the door. That journey started with one simple question. What if I have been searching in the wrong direction all along? The next morning, Nia woke before sunrise. She expected the questions from the previous night to disappear with daylight. Instead, they had only grown louder. She pulled every journal from the shelf and spread them across the wooden table. Years of notes covered the pages. Symbols, dreams, predictions, conversations, and explanations she had accepted without hesitation. Reading them again with fresh eyes, she noticed something she had never seen before. Almost every answer was built on fear. If something good happened, fear warned it would not last. If something bad happened, fear insisted someone had caused it. If the future seemed uncertain, fear demanded another secret, another ritual, another explanation. The pattern repeated itself again and again. Late that afternoon, she returned to the roadside cafe. The elderly pastor was sitting in the same corner with an open Bible and a cup of tea that had long gone cold. "I've been thinking about your question," Nia admitted. The old man smiled gently. "Questions can be the beginning of wisdom." She sat down. "If people aren't trapped by hidden curses the way I believed, why do so many feel as if their lives are falling apart?" The pastor closed the Bible. "Because life is complicated. We experience grief, disappointment, injustice, poor decisions, betrayal, illness, and circumstances beyond our control. Fear tries to weave all those things into one terrifying story." He paused before continuing. "But faith invites us to ask a different question. What is true?" Those three words lingered in the air. What is true? Not what fear imagines, not what rumors repeat, not what desperation invents. What is actually true? For weeks, Nia wrestled with that question. She visited libraries instead of fortune tellers. She spoke with counselors, historians, and pastors instead of people claiming secret knowledge. She read the Gospels slowly, noticing how often Jesus responded to frightened people not with sensational explanations, but with compassion, truth, and hope. One passage stopped her completely. "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." She read it again, then again. Freedom, she realized, was not being offered through hidden knowledge. It was being offered through truth. That realization unsettled her more than anything she had ever believed. If truth brought freedom, then every lie she had accepted had quietly become another chain. She looked around her small apartment. Shelves once filled with objects she believed gave her certainty now felt strangely empty. For the first time, she understood that chasing secret answers had never given her peace. It had only made her more afraid of tomorrow. And if fear had shaped the past 20 years of her life, could courage shape the next 20? That was the question she would soon have to answer. Because before the month was over, a letter would arrive at her door, one connected to a forgotten chapter of her childhood, that would force her to confront everything she believed she had left behind. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. Its envelope was faded, the edges worn as though it had traveled a long distance before finding its way to Naya's apartment. There was no return address, only her name, written in careful handwriting she hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the single sheet of paper. "If you are ready to know why your grandfather disappeared every Friday night, come to the old train station at 7 o'clock. Come alone. There are things your family never understood." No signature, no explanation, just those two sentences. She read them again and again. The old train station had been abandoned for decades. As children, everyone in the village avoided it after sunset. Stories surrounded the place. Some claimed they heard voices carried by the wind. Others insisted strange lights appeared among the rusted tracks. Nia had always believed those stories. Now she wasn't so sure. By evening, dark clouds covered the sky. The station looked exactly as she remembered: cracked brick walls, shattered windows, and vines climbing over faded signs whose words had nearly disappeared with time. She checked her watch. 7 o'clock. No one. Only the distant sound of thunder. Then footsteps echoed behind her. She turned quickly. An elderly woman stood beneath a broken lantern, leaning on a wooden cane. "Yes. I wondered if you would come. You sent the letter." The woman nodded. "My name is Miriam. I knew your grandfather." The name meant nothing to Nia. "I don't understand." "Why now?" "Because your grandfather asked me to wait until you were ready." The answer only created more questions. Miriam motioned toward an old wooden bench still standing beside the tracks. "I've watched many people spend their lives searching for secret explanations," she said quietly. "Most of them were searching because they were carrying pain they never learned how to face." Naya remained silent. "You've spent years looking for hidden forces behind every disappointment, haven't you?" Nia lowered her eyes. "I thought if I understood the darkness, I could protect myself." Miriam sighed. "So did your grandfather." That sentence struck harder than anything else. "My grandfather." He lost his younger brother in an accident when they were boys. He blamed himself for the rest of his life. Eventually, someone convinced him that the tragedy wasn't simply an accident, that there had to be hidden powers responsible. Nia listened carefully. He spent years chasing people who promised answers. Every answer led to another fear. Every fear led to another promise. It became an endless cycle. Miriam reached into her coat and carefully removed an old leather journal. He asked me to keep this until the right time. The cover was cracked with age. Inside were dozens of handwritten entries. Some described sleepless nights. Others recorded conversations with self-proclaimed spiritual experts. But as the pages continued, the tone slowly changed. The later entries no longer searched for mysterious explanations. Instead, they spoke of forgiveness, healing, faith, hope. One sentence had been underlined several times. The greatest prison I ever entered was the one built by fear. The greatest freedom I ever found was accepting that not every unanswered question requires a hidden enemy. Sania stared at the words. She felt tears beginning to form. Everything she had been wrestling with over the past few weeks suddenly felt deeply personal. Her grandfather had walked the same road. He had believed the same fears. Yet somehow, before the end of his life, he had found peace. Why didn't anyone tell me this? She whispered. Miriam smiled sadly. Families often pass down their fears much more easily than their healing. A long silence settled between them. The rain began to fall softly. Miriam stood. There's one more thing your grandfather wanted you to know. She handed Nia a folded map tucked inside the journal. A small red circle marked a place deep in the hills, several hours outside the village. On the back, only 5 words were written. Truth waits where fear ended. So before Nia could ask another question, a loud clap of thunder echoed across the empty station. She looked away for only a moment. When she turned back, Miriam was already walking into the rain, disappearing slowly into the darkness beyond the tracks. Naya remained alone, gripping the journal in one hand and the mysterious map in the other. She had expected another secret. Instead, she had inherited a journey. And somehow, she knew that whatever waited at the place marked on that map would not simply reveal her grandfather's past. It would force her to confront her own. Dawn arrived wrapped in thick fog. Nia barely slept. The leather journal remained open on her kitchen table, its final pages replaying in her mind. Every sentence seemed to pull her toward the place marked on the map. She packed only what she needed: a flashlight, a notebook, a bottle of water, the journal and the map. Before leaving, she hesitated at the door. For years, she would have searched for signs, omens, or warnings before making a decision. This time she simply whispered, "Guide me toward the truth." The drive into the hills took nearly 3 hours. The paved road gradually narrowed into gravel before ending altogether. Beyond it stretched an overgrown footpath winding through towering cedar trees whose branches blocked much of the morning light. According to the map, the destination was less than 2 kilometers away. The forest was unusually quiet. No birds, no distant traffic, only the steady rhythm of her footsteps and the wind moving through the leaves. After nearly 40 minutes of walking, she stopped. Ahead stood an old stone chapel. Its roof had partially collapsed years ago. Ivy covered most of the walls, and the wooden doors hung loosely from rusted hinges. Yet despite its condition, the building carried a quiet dignity. Someone had cared for it once. Above the entrance, nearly hidden beneath moss, were carved words she could barely read. If truth fears no examination. Zanaya pushed the door open. The hinges groaned loudly. Inside, sunlight poured through broken stained glass windows, painting fragments of blue, red, and gold across the dusty floor. The chapel was empty, or so it seemed. As she stepped toward the altar, her flashlight reflected off a small metal object beneath one of the pews. It was an old key. Attached to it was a brass tag engraved with a single number. As 17 gaz, she searched the room again. Nothing. No lock, no chest, no explanation, only silence. Then she remembered something. Near the back wall stood what appeared to be a large wooden bookshelf, although only a few weathered books remained upon it. Curious, she pulled one volume from the shelf. Nothing happened. She replaced it. Another book caught her attention. This one felt strangely loose. The moment she removed it, a dull mechanical click echoed through the chapel. Slowly, the bookshelf shifted several inches. Behind it was a narrow staircase descending beneath the building. A cool draft rose from below. Naya's heart raced. Every frightening story she had believed as a child came rushing back. But another voice quietly challenged those fears. Truth fears no examination. She switched on her flashlight and descended. The staircase ended inside a surprisingly large underground archive. Rows of wooden cabinets lined the stone walls. Each drawer bore a family name. Some were familiar, others she had never heard before. She found one labeled with her own surname. Her hands froze. Inside were dozens of letters, photographs, newspaper clippings, and journals spanning nearly 60 years. None described supernatural events. Instead, they documented forgotten family histories, financial disputes, land ownership records, medical diagnoses that earlier generations had misunderstood, letters revealing long, hidden reconciliations, evidence correcting decades of rumors that had divided neighbors and relatives. The deeper she searched, the clearer the pattern became. Stories that had once been blamed on mysterious forces often had painfully human explanations: miscommunication, greed, jealousy, accidents, pride, and secrets protected by silence. Nia slowly sank into an old wooden chair. She understood now why her grandfather had protected this place. It wasn't a vault of mystical knowledge, it was a vault of truth, and truth, she realized, has a remarkable way of dismantling fear. As she carefully returned the documents to their drawer, something slipped from between two folders. It was a sealed envelope. Across the front, in her grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For whoever is willing to choose truth over fear." Bigara broke the seal. Inside was a single page. It began with a sentence that made her stop breathing for a moment. "If you are reading this, then you have already escaped the first prison. The second one is far more dangerous because it convinces people that fear is wisdom." Six outside, thunder rolled across the hills once again. But this time, Nia did not feel afraid. She turned the page. Whatever her grandfather had written next would reveal the reason this archive had been hidden for decades, and why someone else had recently started searching for it. Nia unfolded the second page with careful hands. The handwriting was steady, deliberate, as though her grandfather had expected this moment long before it arrived. "Thus, if fear has led you here, let truth lead you home," she read on. "When I was young, I believed every rumor I heard. I spent years trying to solve mysteries that never existed while ignoring the problems that stood right in front of me. I nearly lost my family because I chose suspicion over conversation, secrets over honesty, and fear over love." Sanaya swallowed hard. The words felt less like a letter and more like a confession. This archive was never built to hide dangerous knowledge. It was built to preserve forgotten truth. Every generation invents stories to explain pain they do not understand. Over time, those stories become legends, and those legends become prisons. She looked around the underground room again. What had first seemed mysterious now appeared remarkably practical. Every drawer contained records. Every shelf contained evidence. There were birth certificates, property deeds, old maps, newspaper articles, court documents, handwritten diaries, and faded family photographs. Nothing supernatural, just history. History that had been buried beneath decades of speculation. Suddenly a floorboard creaked somewhere behind her. Naya spun around. The archive was empty, or so it appeared. Her flashlight swept across the rows of cabinets. Nothing. She told herself it was the old building settling, yet the uneasy feeling remained. Someone else might know about this place. She carefully folded the letter and placed it inside the journal. Then her light caught something she hadn't noticed before. One cabinet stood slightly open. Unlike the others, it had no family name. Only a brass plate engraved with three words: Est UNR Selved Casis. Curiosity overcame caution. She pulled the drawer open. Inside were only three folders, each sealed with dark green wax. The first bore a date nearly 50 years old, the second 32 years. The third, her heartbeat quickened. The third folder had been placed there less than 2 months ago. Impossible. Someone had visited this archive recently. The seal had already been broken. Inside was a collection of photographs. One showed the chapel from above, another showed the forest trail, another her apartment building. Nia froze. The next photograph showed her walking into the roadside cafe. Another captured her standing with Miriam at the abandoned train station. The final photograph had been taken only yesterday. It showed her entering the chapel. Someone had been watching every step of her journey. Tucked beneath the photographs was a typed note. If you found these, you're asking the right questions. But you're looking in the wrong direction. See no signature, no explanation, only coordinates. A location nearly 100 kilometers away. Before Nia could study them further, footsteps echoed unmistakably across the stone floor above. This time there was no mistaking the sound. Someone had entered the chapel. She switched off her flashlight. Darkness swallowed the archive. Every breath suddenly seemed too loud. The footsteps paused. Then came the unmistakable scrape of furniture moving across the floor. Whoever was upstairs had discovered the hidden entrance. Slowly, carefully, a beam of light appeared at the top of the staircase. It remained still for several seconds. Then it began descending. Nia's mind raced. Should she hide? Should she call out? Should she run? Her grandfather's journal rested firmly against her chest. For the first time since beginning this journey, she realized she was no longer searching only for answers. Someone else was searching for the same truth. And judging by the silence filling the staircase, they had no intention of turning back. The beam of light stopped halfway down. A calm voice echoed through the darkness. If you're reading Samuel's journals. The stranger paused. Then you've discovered only half of what he wanted the world to know. Nia didn't answer. Neither did the stranger. For several long moments, neither of them moved. Finally, the voice spoke again. I'm not your enemy. Another pause. But the people following both of us might be. The silence that followed was far more unsettling than the words themselves. Nia's fingers tightened around the journal. The stranger remained motionless on the staircase, keeping the flashlight pointed toward the stone floor instead of directly at her. I know what you're thinking, the voice said quietly. If I were in your position, I wouldn't trust me either. The calmness in his tone was unexpected. Then tell me your name, Nia replied. A brief silence followed. Elias. How do I know that's true? You don't. He took one slow step forward, careful not to appear threatening. But your grandfather knew me. Nia's pulse quickened. You knew Samuel. For the last 12 years of his life, she studied the silhouette standing halfway down the stairs. He appeared to be in his early 40s, dressed more like a historian than an adventurer. A weathered satchel hung over one shoulder, and instead of expensive equipment, he carried only a flashlight and a leather notebook. If you knew him, Nia asked, why didn't he tell me about you? Because he was protecting you. From what? Elias hesitated. From people who believe truth is far more dangerous than lies. The words echoed through the underground chamber. Nia slowly lowered the flashlight she had been gripping like a weapon. What do you mean? Elias finally reached the bottom of the stairs. Without asking permission, he placed his notebook on an old wooden table and opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings spanning decades. Some reported political scandals, others exposed financial fraud. Several described disappearances that had never been solved. At first, they appeared unrelated. Then Nia noticed something. Every article mentioned people who had attempted to uncover hidden corruption. Journalists, judges, archivists, historians, researchers. Each had disappeared, resigned unexpectedly, or abandoned their investigations. They weren't chasing myths, Elias said. They were following evidence. He turned another page. A map appeared. Red pins marked locations across the country. Each location corresponded with one of the newspaper articles. What you're looking at, Elias continued, who's in the conspiracy, it's something much more ordinary, and therefore much more dangerous. What is it? People protecting power. Nea frowned. I don't understand. When communities don't know the truth, rumors become easier to control than facts. He tapped one of the newspaper clippings. If everyone believes a mysterious curse destroyed a family business, he tapped another. No one investigates the forged contracts. Another clipping. If everyone blames ancient legends for someone disappearing, he looked directly at Nia. Very few people ask who actually benefited. The realization settled over her slowly. Her grandfather hadn't been collecting ghost stories. He had been collecting evidence, evidence that fear often distracted people from asking difficult questions. So the archive was never about hidden supernatural knowledge. Elias finished. It was about preserving facts before they could disappear. Before Nia could respond, a sharp metallic sound echoed from somewhere above. Both of them froze. The chapel door slammed shut, not from the wind. Someone had closed it. Elias immediately switched off his flashlight. His voice dropped to a whisper. We're no longer alone. Another sound, heavy footsteps, more than one person. Deliberate. Measured, searching. Nia's heartbeat pounded in her ears. How many entrances are there? She whispered. Only this staircase. And another exit. Elias remained silent. That silence answered her question. None. The footsteps moved slowly across the chapel floor. A beam of light swept across the ceiling of the underground chamber through the gaps between the wooden boards above. Someone was searching every corner. Then came voices, too muffled to understand, but close enough to know they weren't leaving. Elias carefully reached into his satchel. Naya instinctively stepped back. Instead of a weapon, he pulled out a folded blueprint. He spread it across the table. It was a detailed architectural drawing of the chapel. In one corner, almost hidden beneath handwritten notes, was a passage circled in blue ink. As emergency archive route. It was sealed decades ago, Elias whispered. If it still exists, it leads beneath the old riverbed. Aeneas stared at the faded tunnel drawn on the page. And if it's collapsed, Elias managed a faint smile. Then we'll have to hope your grandfather was as thorough a builder as he was a writer. Above them, the footsteps stopped. Silence. A silence so complete it felt unnatural. Then, three slow knocks echoed directly above the hidden staircase. Not random, intentional. Someone knew exactly where they were hiding. A voice called down through the darkness. You can stay down there as long as you like. The words were calm, almost polite. But sooner or later, the speaker paused. Everyone chooses between protecting the truth and protecting themselves. The chapel fell silent once more. Nia looked at Elias. Elias looked at the faded blueprint. And somewhere beneath their feet, behind walls untouched for generations, lay a forgotten passage that might be their only chance to escape, and perhaps the only path leading to the final secret Samuel had spent his life protecting. No one moved. The voice above had disappeared as suddenly as it came, leaving only an oppressive silence that seemed to settle into the ancient stones. Nia glanced toward the staircase. They know we're here. Elias nodded. They know about the archive. What they don't know is whether we've already found what Samuel wanted hidden. He rolled the blueprint shut and pointed toward the far corner of the chamber. There. At first, Nia saw nothing except rough stone. Then, brushing away years of dust, Elias revealed a narrow iron ring embedded in the floor. Together they pulled. The stone slab resisted. For several tense seconds it refused to move. Then, with a grinding sound that echoed through the chamber, it shifted just enough to reveal darkness below. A cold rush of air escaped from the opening. The passage still existed. Above them, footsteps hurried across the chapel. Whoever was outside had heard the stone move. They're coming. Nia whispered. Elias climbed into the opening first. I'll go ahead. Stay close. The tunnel was barely wide enough for a single person. The ceiling forced them to crouch as they moved forward, their flashlight beams cutting through decades of dust. The air smelled of damp earth and old timber. After several minutes, The tunnel widened into a circular chamber supported by thick wooden beams. Something stood in the center, covered with maps, letters, and a single brass lantern. Someone had been here recently. The lantern still contained fresh oil. Nia slowly approached. Pinned to the wall above the table was an enormous map of the surrounding region. Dozens of colored threads connected villages, churches, schools, courthouses, newspapers, and libraries. It looked less like a treasure map and more like years of careful research. Elias examined one of the folders. His expression changed immediately. This can't be. What is it? He handed her a document. It was a letter addressed to Samuel. The date was only 6 months before his death. The signature at the bottom made Elias inhale sharply. It was written by Judge Eleanor Brooks. You know her. Everyone knows her. Judge Brooks had spent decades exposing corruption before suddenly retiring under mysterious circumstances. Officially, poor health had ended her career. Unofficially, rumors had filled the silence. Naya unfolded the letter. Samuel, it began. They're no longer afraid of evidence. They're afraid of people who teach others how to find evidence. If truth becomes a habit instead of an accident, the lies we've uncovered will never survive another generation. Sanaya looked up. This isn't about one family. No. Elias slowly surveyed the room. It's much bigger. Another cabinet stood against the far wall. Unlike those in the archive, this one bore no lock. Inside were dozens of audio cassettes, each carefully labeled. This interview 01 says is interview 02, Zirex is interview 03. The numbers continued. 48 recordings. These are testimonies, Elias whispered. Real people. He selected one cassette. Its label simply read as the first Lee. Hasib beside the tape sat an old cassette player connected to a portable battery. Remarkably, it still worked. Elias pressed play. Static filled the chamber. Then an elderly man's voice emerged. If you're listening to this, don't ask who told you the story. Ask who benefits if you never question it. Nia exchanged a glance with Irias. The recording continued. I spent 30 years believing my brother betrayed our family. I hated him. I refused to speak to him. When the truth finally came out, the man's voice broke. I discovered someone had forged a single document. A single piece of paper stole 30 years from both our lives. The tape clicked silence. Nia felt a chill. Not because of anything supernatural, because of how believable it was. One lie repeated long enough could reshape an entire lifetime. Elias carefully removed the cassette. Samuel understood something most people never do. What's that? Fear spreads faster than facts. Before Naya could answer, a distant rumble echoed through the tunnel. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Then came another sound. Stone scraping against stone. The entrance behind them. Someone had found a hidden passage. A faint light appeared in the distance. Not one flashlight. Several. They're following us, Nia said. Elias quickly scanned the room. There has to be another exit. He swept his flashlight across the walls. Nothing. Then Nia noticed an inscription carved into one of the support beams. Unlike the words in the chapel, these were almost invisible beneath years of dust. She brushed them clean. The message was short. Truth is not something you hide. Truth is something you pass on. Below the inscription was a simple wooden lever. Nia looked at Elias. What if this isn't an exit? He smiled despite the growing danger. Then Samuel had a very unusual sense of architecture. The approaching lights grew brighter. Voices echoed through the tunnel. They had only seconds left. Nia wrapped both hands around the lever. She took one deep breath and pulled. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, somewhere deep within the ancient chamber, a series of hidden gears began turning. The entire room shuddered. A section of the stone wall slowly started to slide open, revealing a passage neither of them had expected to find. Beyond it was not darkness, it was daylight. And waiting just outside the opening, as though he had known they would arrive, stood an elderly man holding a walking stick. He looked directly at Naya, smiled gently, and spoke only one sentence. Your grandfather always hoped you would choose questions over fear. Then he turned and began walking toward the distant mountains, never once looking back. Naya hurried to catch up with the elderly man, her boots crunching over the loose gravel that bordered the mountain trail. "Wait," she called. The man slowed but did not turn immediately. When he finally faced her, his eyes carried the calm confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime listening more than speaking. "You knew my grandfather," Nia said. "I did. Who you? My name is Thomas, another friend of Samuel's." Thomas smiled faintly. "No, I was once his greatest opponent." The words caught both Nia and Elias by surprise. "You opposed him?" Elias asked. "For nearly 20 years." Thomas rested both hands on his walking stick. "I believed exposing uncomfortable truths only created division. Samuel believed hiding them guaranteed it." A cool breeze swept across the hillside, carrying the scent of pine and approaching rain. "I thought he was dangerous," Thomas continued. "He challenged stories people had believed for generations. He questioned respected leaders. He reopened old wounds everyone wanted buried." "What changed your mind?" Nia asked. Thomas looked toward the distant valley. "My son." Silence settled over the group. "My son was accused of stealing money from our community." Thomas's voice remained steady, but the pain behind it was unmistakable. Everyone believed the accusation. So did I. I never asked for evidence. I never listened to him. I believed the story because it fit what everyone already wanted to believe. He lowered his head. 5 years later, Samuel found the missing financial records. They proved my son had been innocent. Deluya felt her chest tighten. "What happened?" Thomas closed his eyes. "My son had already left. He moved to another country believing his own father no longer trusted him. I spent years trying to find him. When I finally did," his voice faltered, "he forgave me before I could even apologize." No one spoke. The wind carried the silence across the hillside. That was the day I understood something Samuel had been trying to teach me all along. Thomas looked directly at Nia. "Truth doesn't exist to embarrass people. It exists to reconcile them." Elias slowly unfolded Samuel's map. "There are still people searching for this archive." Thomas nodded. "Yes, they've misunderstood its purpose. They believe it contains secrets capable of giving them influence. But all it contains is something far more powerful: courage." Thomas smiled. "No, verification." Leah frowned. "Verification." Samuel insisted on documenting everything. If someone made a claim, he searched for records. If someone repeated a rumor, he looked for witnesses. If someone offered certainty without evidence. Thomas chuckled softly. Samuel usually asked one more question than they were prepared to answer. For the first time since beginning her journey, Nia understood why the archive felt so different from the stories she had grown up hearing. It wasn't built upon mystery, it was built upon patience. Facts gathered carefully, stories checked repeatedly, conclusions reached only after evidence had been examined. Thomas reached into his coat and removed a small brass compass. The instrument looked old but well cared for. He handed it to Nia. It belonged to Samuel. She turned it over in her hand. On the back, engraved so faintly she almost missed it, were the words Evers. "Never mistake confidence for certainty." Thomas noticed her reading. He carried that compass for 40 years. Not because it always pointed north, but because it reminded him that everyone, including himself, could lose direction. A distant engine echoed through the valley below. Elias immediately looked toward the road. A dark vehicle had stopped near the abandoned chapel. Two figures stepped out. One carried binoculars. The other unfolded what appeared to be an old survey map. "They're still searching," Elias said quietly. Thomas wasn't alarmed. "They're looking in the wrong place. Shouldn't we warn them away?" Nia asked. Thomas shook his head. "They're chasing the archive. They still haven't realized." He smiled gently. The archive was never the treasure. Nia looked down at the journal in her hands. "So what is?" Thomas's answer came without hesitation. "The habit of seeking truth with humility." He pointed toward the horizon where the first rays of evening sunlight broke through the clouds. Buildings collapse, documents fade, maps are lost. But teach one generation how to ask honest questions. He paused, and every generation after them becomes harder to deceive. Lanaya looked back one last time toward the hidden chapel. When she had first arrived, she believed she was searching for extraordinary secrets. Instead, she had discovered something quieter, something stronger: the courage to question fear, the patience to seek evidence, and the wisdom to let truth, not rumor, not assumption, not certainty without proof, guide the path ahead. As the three travelers continued along the mountain trail, the wind carried away the last echoes of the old stories that had once held an entire village captive. Ahead lay new questions, not frightening ones, hopeful ones. And for the first time in many years, Nia welcomed them. The mountain path narrowed as dusk settled over the valley. Neither Nia nor Elias spoke for several minutes. Thomas walked ahead at an unhurried pace, his walking stick tapping rhythmically against the stone trail. Finally, Nia broke the silence. My grandfather spent decades preserving the truth. If he succeeded, why hide everything? Thomas stopped beside a weathered overlook that faced the valley below. He didn't hide it forever. He looked at the journal in her hands. He hid it until someone was prepared to understand it. Elias unfolded one final map from his satchel. This isn't the last one Samuel left. Thomas nodded. No. There is one final archive. Nia looked up. Another one. Not an archive of documents. Thomas smiled. An archive of people. She frowned. I don't understand. For years, Samuel quietly taught ordinary people how to preserve history honestly. Teachers, librarians, journalists, judges, archivisters, students. He believed truth survives best when it belongs to everyone instead of one person. The realization settled over Nia. So the real archive was never a building. Thomas nodded. It was a community. A cold breeze swept across the overlook. Elias examined the final map more closely. There are 12 names. Thomas glanced toward it. 12 people Samuel trusted. How many are still alive? I don't know. Leah traced the first name with her finger. Each was followed only by a city. No addresses, no phone numbers, just names, almost like invitations. He wanted someone to find them, Elias said. He wanted someone to continue the work. Thomas smiled. He hoped someone would. Suddenly, Nia remembered the cassette recording. Truth is not something you hide. Truth is something you pass on. So she finally understood what it meant. Not protecting secrets, protecting integrity. Below them, the lights of the village slowly began appearing one by one. For years, those streets had been filled with whispered stories, half-truths, and assumptions. Now they looked different, not because the village had changed, because she had. Fear no longer demanded immediate answers. Instead, curiosity asked better questions. Thomas reached into his coat one final time. From a small envelope, he removed an old black and white photograph. It showed Samuel standing beside 11 other people. Some wore business suits, others wore work clothes. One held a camera, another carried a stack of books. On the back of the photograph, Samuel had written, "Leave every place more truthful than you found it." Anaya stared at the faces. "They don't look extraordinary." Thomas smiled warmly. They weren't. They were ordinary people who refused to let lies become history. A soft laugh escaped Nia. "I spent years searching for extraordinary mysteries." "And what did you find?" She looked toward the valley. "I found ordinary courage." Thomas nodded approvingly. "And that's much harder to find." The three continued walking until they reached a fork in the trail. One path descended toward the village, the other disappeared into the mountains. Thomas stopped. "Our paths separate here." Nia looked surprised. "You're leaving. My work was never to give you answers." He gently tapped the journal. It was to make sure the right questions survived. He turned and began walking toward the mountain path. After several steps, he paused without looking back. "One last thing. If you ever discover a story that makes you afraid," he waited. "Don't ask first whether it's exciting. Ask whether it's true." With that, Thomas disappeared into the fading light. Nia and Elias stood quietly until he was no longer visible. Then Elias folded the map. What now? Nia looked once more at Samuel's journal, the compass, and the photograph. Then she smiled. Now we begin what? She looked toward the village below, listening, checking, learning, and making sure the next generation inherits evidence instead of rumors. As they walked down the trail, the first stars appeared overhead. The mystery Samuel had spent a lifetime protecting had finally been uncovered. It wasn't a hidden power. It wasn't an ancient secret. It was a simple conviction capable of changing families, communities, and generations' truth, pursued with humility and shared with integrity, is stronger than fear. And that was a legacy worth carrying forward. Months passed. The abandoned chapel remained exactly where it had always been, hidden among the cedar trees. To anyone passing by, it was simply another forgotten building slowly surrendering to time. But to Nia, it had become the place where fear ended and truth began. The archive was carefully preserved, not to keep secrets from the world, but to protect fragile history until it could be properly documented, verified, and shared. Working alongside Elias, local historians, librarians, and community volunteers, Naya spent the following year organizing every journal, letter, photograph, and recording Samuel had collected. Some family feuds ended after decades of misunderstanding. Long lost relatives reconnected. Old accusations were corrected by evidence that had been waiting patiently to be discovered. The archive became something Samuel had always dreamed it could be, not a museum of mysteries, but a home for truth. One autumn afternoon, Naya unlocked the restored chapel for its first public exhibition. Children wandered through displays of photographs. Teachers studied handwritten journals. Elderly visitors quietly recognized faces they had not seen in generations. Many left with tears in their eyes, not because they had witnessed something extraordinary, because they had discovered how easily ordinary lives can be changed by honesty. Near the entrance, one display contained Samuel's compass. Beside it was a small plaque. It read, if truth does not ask us to be fearless. Thus, it asks us to be faithful enough to keep searching, as visitors often paused there longer than anywhere else. As the years passed, the stories surrounding the old chapel changed. The frightening legends slowly faded. In their place grew a different tradition. Parents brought their children not to warn them about mysterious dangers, but to teach them the importance of asking good questions, checking facts, admitting mistakes, and choosing integrity over convenience. Fear no longer defined the village. Curiosity did. Compassion did. Truth did. One evening, after the final visitor had left, Nia climbed the hill behind the chapel where Samuel had often watched the sunset. She carried only his journal. Its final blank page remained untouched for years. Until that evening, she opened it carefully and began to write. The greatest inheritance is not certainty. It is the courage to keep seeking the truth with humility. So she closed the journal and looked toward the horizon as the last light disappeared behind the mountains. For a moment, the valley below was perfectly still. Then the chapel bell rang softly in the evening breeze, not as a warning, not as a mystery, but as a quiet reminder that every generation is given the same choice: to live by fear or to walk toward the truth. And in that choice, every new story begins.